Mikayla Murray went missing 12 years ago, on the eve of her 18th birthday. She didn't have any big plans or anything, but her friends described her as having been in a particularly good mood for what was an otherwise perfectly normal Friday. She'd gone to school, soccer practice, work, and then came home for a night of movies with her kid brother, James. He was more excited for her birthday than she was, even wanted to stay awake with her until midnight, but of course had fallen asleep right away. When he woke in the middle of the night, he saw her headlights shining through his window and watched as they rushed down their country road, not knowing that it was the last he'd ever see of her. The poor kid was only 5 and would be forever tormented over why she'd left him, or why she'd never come back. It wasn't until the sun came up on that cold Saturday morning that anyone realized something was wrong. Her parents entered her room to wish her a happy birthday, only to find her bed empty, car gone, and phone off. They'd started their rounds of calls to all Mikayla's friends, but nobody had seen or heard from her. Panic really started to set in when Mikayla's car was found abandoned on the side of a heavily wooded road, facing the wrong direction, practically in the middle of nowhere. There were no parks or hiking trails, nor were there any signs of a struggle or any evidence of where she might have gone next, until Mikayla's parents followed that road on a map. They knew she had a boyfriend, Tom. He was a year older and had just gone off to college. He'd been trying to get Mikayla to come visit him, but her parents forbid it. But if they hadn't, this was the very road Mikayla would have taken to get there. So while Linda Murray filed the missing persons report, Paul Murray sped on up that road, all the way to Tom's university. Tom swore to him, and later, the investigators, that he hadn't seen her in weeks, that he'd been in his room studying that night. His roommate confirmed as much, with the added disclosure of having later gone home, where he'd then spent the weekend. The rest was uncertain. The police looked deeper into Tom and found strands of Mikayla's hair in his car, which proved nothing foul, but it spooked him enough into admitting that he'd seen Mikayla more recently than he'd stated, that he'd picked her up late the weekend prior for a midnight drive. This sounded precisely like what had happened the night she'd gone missing, but police found nothing to substantiate it. Tom was eventually cleared as a suspect, and the Murrays would never let it go. They were certain he was involved in Mikayla's disappearance. So certain that Paul Murray spent several nights sitting outside Tom's dorm, waiting to catch his daughter going in or out. Tom's family wanted to press charges, but Paul had friends in the sheriff's office who'd assured the family that it would not happen again and left Paul with a very stern warning. But being friends with law enforcement only went so far, as the case would soon go cold, with days, weeks, and months passing by without any further updates. The public moved on, while the people in Mikayla's life were left with this dark cloud of uncertainty, wondering what had happened to her. If she was out there somewhere alive, and she was. She was about to return home after more than a decade gone, because I'm Mikayla Murray and I ran away that night to start a new life. That's what I told the Murrays anyway. I had no fucking idea what happened to that girl. I'm awful, I know. I'm not proud of myself. I was desperate. Homeless and on the run. Smoking a pack a day. Sleeping with men from bars for money, only to spend it at another bar and do it all over again. I was stuck and needed a plan. Then I saw her face. Mikayla Murray. It was on a bulletin board at some cheap motel I'd been passing through. There were half a dozen girls on there, but Mikayla stood out, her blonde hair straight and pretty, her blue eyes as wide as her smile. It stopped me dead in my tracks, because she looked like me. Exactly like me. I could have swapped in one of my old high school photos and nobody would have noticed. Not that anyone was paying attention to this board or these girls anymore. Even the lady at the motel, who'd spotted me staring, said, "They ain't common home, dear, but I don't got the heart to take 'em down." I was curious, enough to turn on the phone I'd kept in my bag just in case. My father had long stopped paying for it, but the motel offered free Wi-Fi, and I'd used it to read more about Mikayla. I learned that she was only 2 years older than me, and that the photo in the lobby wasn't just a one-off. She resembled me in every other photo, of which there were many, along with theories about what had happened to her. I couldn't have given any less of a shit about that rabbit hole. What got my interest were the earrings Mikayla wore in these photos, or the necklace her mother wore at the press conference, or the watch on her dad's wrist. As I dug deeper, it became clear that the Murrays had money, a fair good amount of it. After entertaining Jerry from the bar and stealing his jacket, I ripped a butt late that night and decided one of those girls was coming home. And it was going to be me. The Murrays still lived in the same house, an hour west of the small Michigan towns I'd been nesting in, which worked perfectly, as I'd been toying with the idea of going back home to Chicago. It was a cheap way to justify the awful thing I was about to do. Because in reality, there was no fucking way I was actually going back home, even with Murray fortune in my pockets. It's frightening what we'll do to ensure we're the good guys in our story. As I dished out a small chunk of my remaining cash to hop on a bus, I felt no hesitation or fear. Sure, it was risky, but I wasn't planning on being there for more than a night. I'd done enough research on Mikayla to get in, find what I could take, and get out. I was going to beg the family to give me one day before alerting anyone that I'd returned. To let me rest in my own bed before being swarmed by whatever media nowhere Indiana had to offer. After miles and miles of cornfields, I'd hoped to have plenty of time to escape that wave. When the bus arrived at the station, I could help but notice how out of place it looked, like it had been copied and pasted from somewhere else, standing out among the run-down outlets, shops, and restaurants. I spotted a seedy-looking bar next to an even more questionable-looking mechanic and thought about making a detour. I needed a drink, but I couldn't. I had to make sure not to talk to anyone. I couldn't risk being mistaken for the town's longest missing girl. Not here, not now. So when an older man approached me outside the station as I smoked one last cigarette, I'd panicked. He asked if I could bum him one, said that he really needed it. So I did, just to make him go away. Then he started rambling on about his car having broken down in this shithole and how he was stuck here until they fixed it. He told me his name and then asked me my mine. I told him it was Abby. It's not. He said I'd reminded him of his niece back in Iowa, something I pretended was interesting. Maybe I can pretend to be her too, I thought. When I finished smoking, I wished him luck and set off for what I came here to do. I shoved the rest of my cigarettes and lighter deep into my backpack, along with my real identity, and when I turned down Lincoln Ave, I was no longer me. Or Abby, I was Mikayla Murray. The Murrays lived a pretty secluded life. Their home sat alone in the middle of endless plains, their neighbors barely dots in the distance. I was starting to understand why Mikayla might have run away. Although the house itself was beautiful, with many protruding sections and gables, a wraparound porch, and a large two-door garage. There was even an in-ground swimming pool out back, now covered and topped with autumn leaves, and a cute little gazebo further off in the field, draped in numerous flags and dream catchers, with flower pots lining the railings. It certainly didn't look like the kind of place tragedy had struck. I stepped quietly up the stairs and was almost spooked by my own reflection in the glass of their front door. Nerves were definitely setting in now. I rang the bell and felt my stomach sink. What if my dirty blonde hair wasn't light enough, or if Mikayla had had some obvious birthmark I'd overlooked? I was sweating underneath my coat, unable to recall the name of the man I'd taken it from. When the door opened, my heart stopped. Linda Murray was standing there in her casual weekend wear, pleasantly confused. "Hello," she greeted me. Then her face went white in an instant, like her soul had left her body. She shrieked and clasped her hands to her mouth, bursting into tearful exclamations. "Oh my God," she kept repeating. She suddenly lunged forward and squeezed me tighter than I would have liked, her arms attempting to wrap all the way around my backpack. I stood there awkwardly, bracing all of her weight onto my mine, as she surely was about to collapse. The dog at her legs was barking madly, and as Linda's tears dropped onto my back, all I could think about was how pissed off I'd be had I gotten caught because the fucking dog didn't recognize my scent. "What is it, Linda?" Mikayla's dad called from somewhere inside. He soon appeared in the doorway, his button-up tucked into his jeans, and when saw my cold, pale face poking over Linda's shoulder, he stumbled back. "What is this?" he gasped. His eyes went wide, and his bushy gray mustache twitched. The dog was still barking, reminding me that I was in fact a stranger in this house. I smiled and said, "I'm home, Daddy." I was trying to make myself cry, and if Linda had squeezed me any harder, I just might have. She held onto my sleeve as we let go, as though afraid her daughter would run off again. Paul Murray was still staring at me in disbelief when something shifted in his face and he stepped forward. "Come here, baby girl," he uttered. Linda passed me off like a toy she did not want to share. Paul pulled me into his arms and held even tighter than she had. We rocked back and forth for a moment. "I can't believe it's you," he whispered. Linda rushed for the door and yelled inside, calling for her son James. "Come inside, baby," Paul beamed as he released me, keeping a hand on my back and beckoning me inward. "It's cold, come." We moved into the foyer where Paul asked to take my coat, which I happily handed him. Now that I was inside, I could practically smell the bar on it. "Your bag, sweetie," he added. I shook my head and said, "No, that's okay." He made a face and I worried it was suspicion, and then worried more that my worrying was the only thing suspicious. I had to settle down. I'd nearly jumped when Paul turned the locks and hit a button on the alarm system. It chimed louder than I would have expected. I wondered if all this had always existed, or if it was a result of their daughter having slipped out one night, never to be seen again. One of her coats still hung on a hook by the door, untouched after all these years. Now mine hung next to it. Well, Danny's or whatever. As we moved even further inside, I was blown away by how nice this place was, so much so that I'd slipped and let it show. Nothing in this house was supposed to be surprising to me. It was hard not to be impressed by the high ceilings and bookshelves, or the many sofas beside a grand marble fireplace, or the fact that this was just the room that branched off to all the other rooms, one they'd probably hardly ever used. As I continued to survey my surroundings, a figure high above caught my eye. It was James. He looked down over the railing and looked more flabbergasted than anyone to have seen me. At 17, he was now the same age his sister was when she vanished, only much taller but with the same baby face. "Look, James, look who it is," Linda cried joyfully. "It's Sissy, come give her a hug." I wanted to puke. James didn't move right away, and when he did it was this slow, cautious crawl. I figured surely, of all people, I'd have been safest around James. After all, he'd hardly ever known his sister. Yet the baby blue eyes behind his jet black hair were piercing into mine, searching for the girl he so dearly missed. I couldn't think of what to say to him, and was distracted by the feel of the cigarettes in my bag. I needed one. "Hi," was all he mustered, stopping at the foot of the stairs. "Hey, Goober," I replied. I had no idea if that was something Mikayla ever called him, but neither had anyone else. James and I then did something resembling a hug and let go. Linda looked on, face red, still overcome with emotion. Paul was smiling at us. "Let's go sit, yeah," he suggested. "You look exhausted." He wasn't wrong. I couldn't wait to sit down. There probably wasn't a piece of furniture in this place less comfortable than the mattresses I'd been living on for the last decade. I held in my amazement as we marched from room to room, deeper and deeper into the house. Linda was still exhaling this stuttered, painful sob, and kept reaching to touch me in any way, a hand on the back or a light brush of the hair. It was annoying, but then again I'd never learned how to have a mother. When I shrugged Linda off, she looked heartbroken. It was at that moment that I finally began to feel like the asshole I knew I was. After passing through the kitchen and down another hall, we stopped in their second, larger living room. It was very open, the ceiling reaching all the way up to the third story, with photos lined as high as a ladder could reach. I followed Mikayla's progression of school photos, remarking how eerily similar they were to mine, and how they were one photo short. There was an upper level beside us, where a grand piano sat in one corner and a bar in the other, separated by yet another fireplace. I imagined how nice a Christmas tree must have looked in here, even during the day with the natural light coming in through the sliding glass doors to the back porch. Each Murray dropped onto a separate couch on the lower level. Paul gestured for me to sit next to Linda, who, of course, was eager to be next to me. James was slouched directly across, staring down at the ground. The rest of us were darting our eyes, waiting for someone to begin. Paul cleared his throat. "Let me just start by saying that we're not mad." Linda was nodding feverishly in agreement. Paul went on. "We just want to know what happened." Something inside my gut rung. If my actual dad had showed even an ounce of this concern, I might not have run away myself. Instead, he took his brother's side. My abuser. I dropped my head. I needed to get out of here. I felt trapped. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just didn't know what else to do. I'm really sorry. It certainly wasn't Oscar-worthy, but I wasn't playing the long con. I only needed to be passable long enough for me to swipe several of the items we'd passed along the journey to this room. Paul nodded slowly, gazing off somewhere over my shoulder. "Okay," was all he said. It was somehow worse than anything else he could have said. For all I knew, Mikayla had had a great life here, with a loving family. Now I was making them feel responsible. Each of them was staring off somewhere, letting my story sink into their minds. I wanted to sink into the couch. "Where did you go, Mikayla?" Linda suddenly wondered. Paul leaned forward. "No, Linda, it's okay. She's not a little girl anymore. That's her business. Listen, baby girl, we don't have to talk about it if you don't want. All that matters now is that you're home and you're safe." He reached for my hands and held on gently. It was strangely comforting. For the first time in my life, I'd felt cared for and safe. In my short time there, I'd completely flipped my thinking. What if Mikayla was just another stupid teenager rebelling against parents who were only trying to protect her? What if she'd sneaked out to celebrate her 18th birthday with her college boyfriend at some frat party? What if he slipped something into her drink? Or if she got too experimental? What if someone offered her something she'd never tried before and she took it? To be cool, to show off in front of her college boyfriend's college friends? I'd spent my whole life wishing I had hers. What if she'd just left it? "You know what? I have an idea," Paul said with a clap. "Linda, why don't you go out and get stuff for pork sandwiches? I'll cook up some tater tots." "Yeah." He was looking at me with raised eyebrows like I was supposed to know what the fuck he was talking about. So I pretended to. This must have been some sort of Murray tradition or Mikayla's favorite meal. "That sounds great," I replied. I tried to smile at James, but it was clear he wasn't ready to forgive his sister for abandoning him. Linda hopped up. "Mikayla, sweetie, do you want to come with me?" I hated how often she was saying her name and how she spoke to me like I was 5. Before I got a chance to respond, Paul chimed in. "Hun, let her breathe. Run to the store, I'll get things started here, and you," he said to me, "go rest up. It's gonna be crazy here by tomorrow. I just want to have one night as a family first." I could not have agreed more. Everything was going exactly as I had planned, maybe better. There was a really shiny, diamond-studded vase across the room calling my name, right next to an autographed jersey of some football player I'd never heard of. I was gonna walk out with one while wearing the other. "Go on up to your room," Paul said to me. "We'll come get you when it's ready." Linda pulled me in for another hug and kissed me on the side of the head. She looked over at James and saw that he was looking rather lifeless. She caught his attention and made a tipping motion toward her mouth, to which James replied, "I took them already." He finally glanced my way, but it wasn't quite the look I wanted to see. There was more than just betrayal in his eyes. Everyone broke at once and dispersed, Paul heading for the kitchen and Linda making her way out. I grabbed my backpack and followed a sluggish James up the stairs, feeling good about how things were going so far, until it occurred to me that I'd had no idea which room was Mikayla's. It wasn't something she'd ever have forgotten, not even after 12 years. James and I rounded the corner and were faced with a long, narrow hallway with several doors. I feared I was going to have to guess the right one when James threw me a lifeline. "Hey," he began. He'd stopped in front of his door and turned to me. "Do you want to hang out? Watch a movie or something?" Even this had come out tense, like he was being forced to ask. Then I remembered that this had been the last thing he and Mikayla had done together. "Yeah, sure," I said happily. "I don't think I'm ready to see my room yet anyway." James nodded, and the knot in my stomach untwisted. When we entered his room, I was surprised by how neat it was, so much so that it felt wrong laying my dirty bag down. James' baggy jeans and messy hair gave me a totally different vibe, but his bed was made, the walls were bare, and the desk in the corner looked like it had hardly ever been used. The one window in the room had a perfect view of the setting sun beyond the fields. Its shadow cast a line between the pool below and the gazebo that was just barely visible from this vantage point. I heard a lock click. "We need to go now," James whispered. He let his neutral expression drop into one of panic. I watched in confusion as he rushed over to his closet and threw on a sweater, cursing under his breath as he did so. When he looked up at me again, it was like he'd forgotten I was there. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. James shook his head. He knew the whole time. My brain was automatically rattling off ways to salvage this, but there was no point. I was caught and something other than my identity was bothering him. That made me nervous. What gave it away? I wondered. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Do you have any idea what's going on here? He killed her. He buried her." My heart stopped. What? That wasn't in any of the theories I'd read online. Like everyone else, I had been so sure it was the boyfriend, Tom. It was obvious. But the look of fear washing over James' face was hitting me as well. "How do you know that?" He took me by the arm and dragged me to the window. "Look," he spat with an outward finger against the glass. Far beyond the covered pool sat the gazebo, lifeless and weather-worn, with noticeable chips in its white paint. Only its right side was visible from behind the rest of the house. I could see the flags encircling its beams, waving calmly above a row of gardening supplies. James was breathing heavily as he stared out at it, his eyes fixed, even as he spoke. "He built it right after she disappeared, and we're not allowed to use it, calls it his garden. I climbed it once when I was 10 and he beat the shit out of me, but I've seen him out there at night a couple times, spraying the plants, fixing the dirt. And look," he hurried to his dresser and rummaged through before pulling something out and jamming it into my gut. I reached down. It was a dirty, purple bracelet, all stretchy and rubber. It had Mikayla's name on it. I played with it in my hand. "Remy dug that up last year," said James. "Dropped it right at my feet, and I remember it. I remember her wearing it that night." I stared at it and let it slide down onto my wrist, trying to find any counter to his theory. "You saw her drive off," I reminded him. "I saw her car drive off." There was a voice in the back of my mind telling me he was delusional. But the voice that believed him was louder and much more afraid. I watched, mouth agape, as he struggled to tie his shoes. He kept messing up and starting over, spitting more curses under his breath. My thoughts were swirling. "James, why haven't you called the police?" "Because I can't." It was louder than he'd intended. He stood up and recollected himself. "My dad is friends with the sheriff. If a cop pulls up, he'll kill us. If I run, he'll kill my mom. I don't even think she'd believe me." I put my hands up to quiet him, but the fearful cry he'd been holding in had burst out. He covered his mouth to push it back in, along with the snot and tears that were oozing out of him. He rushed over to his bedside drawer and picked up a bottle of pills, swiftly popping a few into his mouth. My chest was getting tighter. "Why can't we just play along a little longer?" I said. "I'll leave tonight. If we go downstairs, we're dead. We were dead the second you got here. The police, the news, they'll all be here tomorrow, whether you're here or not. They could find her. I could tell them. My dad might snap like he did on Mikayla. You don't understand, he'd rather die than get caught. And he'd take us with him, I know it. So we need to go, out the window, now. We'll just run." At that point, it no longer mattered to me if James was right or if he was out of his fucking mind. I wanted to get out of there. I looked out the window again. It was starting to get dark. I would have preferred a more casual escape over jumping off the roof. But if what he was saying was true, then we had no choice. I was craving a cigarette more than ever, and that alone was almost enough to get me on that roof. "We could take a bus," I said. "It's how I got here. It's only a couple miles that way." "I know where it is. We just have to stay off the roads. We can use the fields for cover, and then once we—" There was a knock on the door. "James," it was Paul. He tried turning the handle. "Everything all right in there?" Without hesitation, James ran for the window and opened it. I could hear the faint chime of the alarm from somewhere out in the hall. Paul's jiggling of the locked door grew more aggressive. "What the hell is going on in there? Open the door." When he started pounding on it, I threw on my bag and joined James, who was already halfway out the window. Together we scurried on the roof, hopped onto the back porch, and dropped down onto the rather large portico above the back door. I'd almost fallen down the side, but James held me up. A loud crash came booming from back up in his room. I looked up. "Don't stop!" James yelled. He jumped first onto the lawn, and I followed. Both of my feet and knees took the impact hard, the ground underneath the autumn foliage deceptively solid. James helped me up, and we took off running. Against his advice, I looked back and saw Paul peeking out James' window. He shouted to us and then disappeared. James had already separated himself a good distance from me. I kept pushing my legs as he called back for me to do so, my backpack bouncing off my ass with each stride. There was a road in the distance, the same road I'd trudged along to get here. I could see where it met the orange and purple sky. It felt like it was never getting any closer. A gunshot rang loud, ripping across the plains. Paul was now standing by the back door aiming a rifle in our direction, his cries chasing us behind the gunpowder. Another bang and my legs buckled. When I'd reached the gazebo, I hid behind it to catch my breath. There was a sharp, debilitating pain in my side. I held myself up on one of the railings and thought I could feel my heartbeat vibrating against the wood. I swore if I'd survived this, I would quit smoking. I peeked around the corner and saw Paul hurry into the garage, James calling out for me by the road. But as I stood there frozen against the gazebo, flags caressing my shoulder, I thought about the girl buried underneath. What if James was right? What if nobody ever found Mikayla's remains? What if we didn't make it out of there and nobody ever knew? I thought of my own story, unheard and not believed. When I'd told my dad what my uncle had done all those years, he hit me. I couldn't let this story stay buried too. I took out my lighter and lit a flag, and then another. The fire burned slowly, picking up quick as it caught onto more flags and dream catchers, then down to the plants below. I stumbled back and watched the flames spread and dance along the darkening sky. I hoped, at the very least, it would be a distraction, and more so enough to attract law enforcement. I could hear Linda's shrill voice crying out at the sight of it. She'd rushed around the side of the house with groceries in her hands, calling out for her husband who had just sped off in his truck. He was coming. I made one last dash for James, who was impatiently waving me on. He took my arm and led me across the road his father would soon be turning onto. We slipped into the cornfield and kept going until we heard the roar of an engine pass by. We froze until there was nothing but the wind, the pain in my side still nagging me. As dark as the sky had rapidly grown, it was even darker in that field, the corn towering over us, clinging to life as much as we were. Paul's headlights were shining through from not much farther ahead. We waited in terror, for a crunch or a shout, or, ideally, for the truck to zoom off. Another gunshot rang high into the air. I gasped and had to cover my mouth to quiet my breathing. "What are you doing with my son?" Paul called in a sing-songy fashion. We could hear him walking about over the sound of his engine purring. "Where the fuck are you?" His footsteps wandered around, farther, closer, then farther again, separated only by the sound of swishing corn as he searched randomly along the outer edge. There was a pause, followed by a door slamming shut. Paul's truck whirled and sped back down the road. I exhaled as James tugged on my arm and instructed to keep going. We pushed through more corn and followed along the road as best as we could. I never would have imagined being in this situation when I'd walked down it earlier that day. Now I was wishing I never had. Sirens suddenly wailed nearby and eventually rushed past us. The glow of the flames had grown noticeably brighter in the distance, the smoke visible high above the fields. "Holy shit," James gasped. "Come on, we need to keep moving. Are you okay?" "Yeah." I wasn't. We shuffled farther through the corn, shoving it aside more aggressively as we went. I could hardly see more than a few feet in front of me. After a while, we could hear a steady buzz of passing vehicles, indicating that we'd reached the city, but also the end of the cornfields. We stepped out onto a road and into the glow of street lights. I felt like I could breathe again for just a moment. "You ready?" he said. "We gotta move quick, but we gotta blend in." I'd realized in that moment how truly young James was and how insane I was for having put my life in his hands. I was 28, but felt just like the same little girl I was all those years ago, hoping her father would protect her. I'd only hoped James was better at it. We dashed across an empty street and then slipped into the downtown area. I kept my head down. Most of the businesses on the strip were closed for the night, but the bar I'd seen earlier was now glowing in its neon signs, which did a good job masking its otherwise unapproachable facade. There were locals standing outside having a smoke, drunkenly arguing about nothing. James and I crossed the street, and when we reached the bus station, I was relieved to see the lights were still on. This relief would not last. Incoming only, folks, the man at the desk told us. You'll have to wait until morning. Sorry. I was already making my way for the exit. James caught up with me. What are you doing? I'm getting the fuck out of here. What am I supposed to do? He followed alongside me, being more conspicuous than I would have liked. I stopped and leaned in close. I don't fucking care. Come with me or don't. I'm leaving. I was on the verge of crying, the lump in my throat growing larger. James stood there at a complete loss. I looked at him and saw the 5-year-old boy who woke up that night all alone, the streetlights above shining in his eyes like the headlights he'd watched disappear. I'm sorry, I added. I just want to go home. I couldn't believe I had said it and meant it. Then I realized James couldn't go home. If my fire failed, he was going to be on his own, on the run, and homeless at 17. Just like I was. They're going to find Mikayla, I assured him. Then you'll be safe. He was trembling. What if they don't? I had no answer, not one he would have liked anyway. Even if we'd made a call to the police that very moment, I could already see Paul going home and putting the rifle to Linda's head before putting it in his mouth. I'd wondered if he already had. I think James did too. He leaned into me and started to cry. He was a whole foot taller than me and bony, but I held on to him, not like I had with Paul or Linda, but with Ernest. Excuse me, a voice suddenly called out to us. I was about to run when I saw a familiar face. The old man I'd smoked with earlier was approaching us from the mechanics lot next to us. His face twisted when he recognized me back. Oh, it's you. Abby, right? Everything all right over here? James and I looked at each other but said nothing. An idea crossed my mind. Actually, no, sir, we're stuck here too. The man, whose name I'd forgotten, grinned. Huh, well, car's fixed. I'm about to head out if you guys need a lift. Where you headed? Anywhere, I begged. His smile faded. Right, okay, sure, that's fine. I'm gonna be driving west down 80 for a while if that works for y'all. Yes, I said. That's perfect. James and I followed the man back to the lot and hopped into his old station wagon. I took the front. I thanked the old man repeatedly, even offered him gas money, but he refused it, said he was happy to help. He introduced himself to a catatonic James in back, reminding me his name was Frank. My eyes kept darting between Frank's and the rearview mirror he was periodically checking. James was huffing short, panicked breaths. I'd wondered if he needed his meds. We drove in silence for a while. You couldn't see anything beyond the headlights' path, just a deep, empty void. The old man tried to spark up conversation, but neither James nor I were up for it. He'd asked if we wanted the radio on or off, if we were hungry, if we were cold, hot. Each time I told him we were fine. He took the hint, and we drove for hours down the same stretch of highway having barely spoken, until James had fallen asleep. I know it ain't my business, young lady, but are you sure you and your friend are okay? Frank kept his voice just above the hum of the radio. I assured him once more that we were fine, even though my mind was still back on Lincoln Ave, wondering what had been happening that very moment at the Murray household. If the flames revealed the truth below, or if they were extinguished before they got the chance. I played an imagined scene in my mind over and over. The fire trucks, the inspection of the damage, Paul watching eagerly nearby, ready to run. The discovery of bones, the call to the sheriff, the arrest of the man he'd known and tried to help all those years ago, or whom he might now have to hunt down. Will you at least tell me your real name? Frank asked, bringing me back to reality. We had so clearly been withholding truth from this poor man. All he wanted was just a small piece of it, maybe so he could justify the crazy thing he had done that day. I looked down at my fidgeting hands and noticed the purple bracelet still tight along my wrist, the pink lettering of Mikayla's name flashing with every passing street light. I'd forgotten that I was still wearing it. I thought about how badly I wanted to give her the ending she deserved, the one she'd wanted for herself. An escape, freedom, how easy it would have been to do it to say her name. It's Rachel, I uttered instead. Frank smiled at me. Well, Rachel, it's nice to finally meet you. I let him drive us another hour. It was almost midnight. When I woke James to get out, he jumped. I had Frank drop us off at a cheap bed and breakfast, something I'd grown quite accustomed to over the years. I tried once more to pay him, but he wound up giving me money instead. It wasn't much, but the gesture alone was beyond kind. In spite of everything I'd been through that day and all that came before it wasn't any less meaningful coming across someone as genuinely good as that man. I felt bad that I'd lied to him about my name again. James and I shared a bed, sleeping head to toe beside a rattling air conditioner. I wouldn't have slept anyway. I was plenty happy with the 4 hours I got. When I woke early the following morning, I stepped outside for a cigarette and enjoyed every moment of it. I'd quit another day. James was sitting up in bed by the time I went back inside, his hair an awful mess, his tired eyes red. He'd asked me what our plan was. He was impatient, and I understood. I told him that we should eat breakfast first and figure it out from there. It had almost been an entire day since I'd eaten last. When we entered the dining area, we saw that there were only a few other guests inside. I still wanted a table in back, but James insisted we sit by the bar where a TV was playing the news. I gave in. He was worried about his mother, and I couldn't blame him for that. I'd have been worried about mine too if she were still alive. I was really hoping this aspect of our lives remained different. James was glued to the TV, even as the waitress came and took our order. "You're going to drive yourself crazy," I told him as she walked away. He shook his head at me and kept his eyes fixed. We sat in silence as we waited for our food and potential news. "Your coat," James suddenly recalled. "You left your coat at my house," I laughed, to which James blinked. "It's not my coat," I explained. "Whose is it?" "Some guy named Scott, I think, maybe Jordan." It wasn't long before the waitress arrived with our meals. We'd ordered the same thing, only my eggs were scrambled. There was something about the smell of bacon and home fries that brought comfort strong enough to make you forget that you were on the run. I moaned at the first bite. Probably could have eaten both plates. I even thought I saw a moment of calm in James' face as he ate. The TV caught our attention. "Thank you, John." Authorities say they responded early last night to a fire in one very familiar Indiana home. The home of Mikayla Murray. James nearly fell out of his seat. I dropped my fork and a home fry fell on the floor. Missing since 2008, Mikayla's disappearance was one that rocked the small town of Millersburg, Indiana, but left many hopeful that she was still out there, listening. But when authorities found her car abandoned near the Elkhart River, just miles from her home, friends and family began to fear the worst. Mikayla was gone, her whereabouts never discovered. Until now. I wanted to turn back to James, but was afraid of the look on his face. When authorities cleared the scene last night at 1108 Lincoln Avenue, they made a shocking discovery that would answer a decade-long mystery, but spark a new one. It cut to the sheriff's press conference. He spoke matter-of-factly, while cameras clicked all around him. The fire department responded to a 911 call around 5 p.m. last night. There was a gazebo on fire in the yard of the Murray residence, and when we assessed the damage, we discovered a bunker hidden underneath. Upon further inspection of the bunker, we found the body of a young woman and child. We've indeed confirmed the woman to be Mikayla Murray, but have no further information at this time. James squealed. "They found her." I ignored him, my face sunken. Waitresses and patrons were noticing our panicked state. Something wasn't right. She'd been buried under there for so long, there shouldn't have been much to find. And a child. It is believed that Mikayla had been held captive inside the bunker since that fateful day 12 years ago. Until last night when, tragically, both she and the child suffered fatal smoke inhalation resulting from the fire. Authorities have yet to confirm the identity of the child or who started the fire. Mikayla's mother, Linda, is being questioned by police while federal officials search for her father, Paul, and brother, James, both of whom are now missing. If you have any information on their whereabouts, please call this number and stay tuned for more on this story. I couldn't feel my body. I turned around and stared down at my shaking hands on the table, the world caving in on me. "What happened?" James cried. His breathing was heavy, his eyes bulging out of their sockets, staring at me bewildered. I finally looked at him. "I killed Mikayla,"